It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
Welcome to A Pair of Bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. I'm your host, Hannah MacDonald, and I'll be bookending the conversation with some of the most exciting voices from the bookish world. Welcome back, Bookends. On today's episode, I'll be chatting about The Pretender, the new novel from Joe Harkin. The Pretender is Wolf Hall meets Demon Copperhead. We begin in 1480 on a small farm in a rural village where we meet John Colin, a 12-year-old boy living with his widowed father. Amidst the chaos of England, John's life is pretty normal until he's taken from his family home, first to Oxford, then to Burgundy, and then Ireland. Throughout this journey, his name is changed and he's told he's the 17th Earl of Warwick and rightful heir to the throne, and so sparks a whirlwind adventure full of secrets and lies. This is a hugely ambitious and gripping story of Tudor England in all its chaos, filth, and sorrow. Jo Harkin is a writer based in Berkshire. She studied literature at university and then, as she describes, daydreamed her way through her 20s in various jobs before becoming a full-time writer. Her debut novel, Tell Me an Ending, was published in the UK by Penguin and in the US by Simon & Schuster and was a New York Times top sci-fi pick for 2022. Her latest novel, The Pretender, is out now and published by Bloomsbury. Here to chat all about it, welcome Jo to A Pair of Bookends.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Now, before we delve into your writing journey and your book, I do like to begin by asking what you're currently reading.
So right now I'm actually reading Harry Kunzru's Blue Ruin. I think it's kind of a companion piece to Red Pill and White Tears, even though they're all standalone books. And I mean, everything of his he writes, I just adore. And then I'm only a few pages in, so I don't know if I could really call that a current read, but Danny Hayward Lonsdale, I just finished her book as well. I think she might have been on the podcast.
Yes.
Yeah, so I just finished that not long ago and I just absolutely loved that. It's just such a great story of mystery. It's got sort of shades of Portrait of Dorian Gray.
Yes.
And just we've got such a brilliant historical fiction read, her debut. So I'd recommend that to anybody.
Yes, me too. What are your reading tastes like? Do you gravitate towards historical fiction? I mean, we will get onto your writing journey in a second because I know that you shifted gears in terms of the genre that you were writing. But what is your reading taste like?
I think fairly diverse. I really enjoy anything that sort of has an original take or a distinctive voice. I always gravitate towards. I wouldn't say I'm kind of immersed in either sci-fi or historical. Probably it's like a little bit arrogant of me to have just, entered these arenas without really having a full grounding in the history of either of them. But like a lot of huge historical writers and sci-fi writers I haven't read. With historical, Mantell, I love. She's a huge influence. And then there's like more kind of sideways takes on history that I really enjoy. So Nicola Barker's The Cauliflower. This is set in 19th century India, and it's just really, the form is really experimental. It's hilarious. It's just this wild ride, ostensibly about a guru, but it takes in so many other elements of Indian history and so many other perspectives. And then there's Lincoln in the Bardo, which was a huge inspiration for this book. Again, it's quite different. It's experimental and also funny. Like it's really moving. It's about the death of Abraham Lincoln's young son. And it's set in this graveyard where he's talking to ghosts. So it's, surreal, heartbreaking, but also very, very absurd and funny. So I think, those have been really influential.
I still haven't read Lincoln in the Bardo, and I've heard so many people speak about it. And I'm just kind of nervous about it, I think, because it's quite a big book, isn't it?
I don't know. Actually, I don't know if it's too hefty. It's got a lot of, there's a lot of it's like in chorus format, almost like, like a play, when you read a play script, it's kind of like spread out. So it's not a long read. And I think it would be quite tough if it were, because it is so experimental and different in its structure. I think it is exactly the right length. So I wouldn't be daunted. I would definitely throw yourself in. It's
Okay.
immediately hilarious as well. Like, I think I laughed on the first page, so
Oh,
you'll
I
enjoy
love that. Okay. I'm going to take the leap, I think. Thank you. So let's get onto your writing journey. So, as I said before, like you completely switched gears. Your debut novel was sci-fi. This is obviously historical fiction. How do you figure out the stories that you want to tell?
kind of random. So the sci-fi one, it's sort of soft sci-fi. It's I think you could call it speculative fiction. I know there's debate about what's sci-fi and what's speculative, and I'm not going to get into that. But it's a Black Mirror type sci-fi. It's not set in space or anything like that. It's basically modern life, but with something tweaked, like
Mm.
a twist to the. So in this case, it's that we can remove memories. And I think with both of these novels, the ideas come to me very randomly.
Step into the world of power, loyalty, and luck.
I'm gonna make him an offer he can't refuse.
With family, cannolis, and spins mean everything.
Now, you wanna get mixed up in the family business.
Introducing The Godfather at ChumbaCasino.com. Test your luck in the shadowy world of The Godfather slot.
Someday, I will call upon you to do a service for me.
Play The Godfather now at ChumbaCasino.com.
Welcome to the family.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
I can't track or say why, how they came to me or how I thought of them, which is not very helpful. But I think the things they have in common are that in each case, the idea was kind of born out of thinking how would someone I know react, feel, and like behave in this situation? It really is kind of a thought experiment, just but very human grounded. And I think, yeah, that's the common theme. And I think I wanted the novels to be centered on the human experience and relationships, connection, even in an unfamiliar world. In, one case, a kind of near future where you can change your memories, and then in another case, 500 years in the past in the Tudor world. So yeah, but the thing in common is it really is just about the characters and maybe how much meaning we can find for ourselves in them.
I love that. And you write characters so well, but how do you go about fleshing out your characters? I mean, obviously with this book, you've taken a real person. So yeah, how do you go about fleshing out those characters, and how do you go about, especially with this book, balancing fiction with historical fact?
Yeah, so Lambert Simnel was an interesting one in terms of character. So all we know, we don't know very much about him. He's just a very small part of recorded history, and that was intentional because, he was put forward as a York claimant to the throne, trying to overthrow King Henry VII. So King Henry VII was not going to have his official chroniclers dwell for too long on that episode. He wanted to just minimize the whole thing and move on. So as a result, we don't know all that much about him. We know he was a young boy. He was claimed to be the real Earl of Warwick, who at the time was the sort of next in line to the throne from the previous York dynasty before Henry Tudor came and defeated King Richard III. So yeah, we know that's who he was claiming to be. And he was only a boy when he invaded England supposedly at the head of an army, but really he was just being puppeted by these adults. And then once the invasion failed, which it did quite quickly, he was pardoned and he was put to work in Henry's kitchens. And that was kind of a bit of a statement, like, this kid is a nobody, and now he's been returned to that. And that's all we know. So in terms of character, there wasn't really anything. I didn't have any clues as to who he was, to how he felt, like how he reacted, whether he wanted any of this. So that was really interesting. That gave me a lot of, this is partly why I decided to write it, mainly because I was curious. And so there was, a kind of blank slate there. He did actually supposedly write a confession, but that would have been written for him, and he just put his name to it. So a lot to work with there. And then finally, after he is put to work, when he's still a kid, there's nothing else on his history after that. We don't know what happened to him. And that, again, I needed to kind of come up with a character for him from scratch, imagining this second act. And it was quite a task. And I think also there are all these huge events in history, like his travels around Europe and his mission to take the throne brought him into contact with all these iconic figures of the time. Like, it was like a who's who of medieval history. So, and there was just a lot to get onto the page. So I think one of the challenges as I wrote with him was to keep him as a character, to kind of yeah, I had a sense of who he was, but then there was so much else going on that sometimes he was in danger of kind of being lost in the soup a little bit, like in the same way that the original Lambert Simnel was. So in rewrites, I kind of went through to bring out his reactions more and bring out his inner world, which I kind of had left a little bit for the reader to fill in, and I realized, no, I have to do a bit more here. So yeah, it was a real learning curve as I wrote, and I hope his voice now comes through, especially as his character changes as the novel goes on.
Yeah, for sure. It's such a fascinating story that I definitely hadn't come across before, and I wonder how many people this will be kind of new to. But I wondered, how did you first come across his story?
Literally by absolute chance. So I wasn't supposed to have come across his story, really. I was meant to be writing another sci-fi, and again, it was going to be memory based. I was supposed to be looking up journal articles about the formation of memory at a molecular level, and which was a little bit dry. So I ended up reading a book about the kings and queens of England, which had been on my, I don't know why I picked that up, honestly. It had been on my to read pile for a while. And yeah, I found a few stories I really enjoyed, but that was the one that really, for some reason, I mean, it was just a little footnote. It jumped out at, and yeah, and then that kind of it got in my head. I started Googling him and started thinking about it, and you sort of know, like, yeah, I think around the sort of second Google, I realized that I wasn't going to write my sci-fi, that I was going to write about this kid instead.
I love that. It's so funny that you'd had that book on your TBR pile for so long, and then you just randomly picked it up, and that's completely changed your kind of direction. I know that there's quite a thing with authors about the second novel and how that can sometimes bring more worries or pressure than the debut novel. Was that the case for you?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose doing a complete U-turn has its own sets of anxieties. I like, yeah, my agent at the time was sort of a little bit, are you sure about the whole thing? But yeah, I always kind of envisaged that as a writer, I would write in different genres. I never saw myself at the outset as like purely sci-fi writer. I mean, I fully expect to switch genre again. And I think there are some amazing inspirations in that area. Margaret Atwood jumps around, Kazuo Ishiguro. Not that I'm comparing myself to them, don't get me wrong. But I think it is a really rewarding way to write. And I guess it meant that, yeah, I remember being asked once sort of what you learn as you write and if you feel more confident as you go into the second novel. And I think maybe if I'd written something in the similar vein as the first, I would feel like I was on solid ground. But then any lesson I learned from the first one, I basically had to wasn't really relevant for this one. So writing it felt like writing a debut again, because it was a new area. I didn't know what I was doing. There was a lot of material, and yeah, it was a whole set of different challenges.
Yeah, I can imagine, and I think it's so cool that you've done this and that you've changed genres, because I think it's so easy to just kind of be put in one box and to stay there because maybe it feels safe, or maybe because you know what you're doing there. But I think there's more opportunity to kind of change and learn and grow if you're kind of exploring new things and new ideas. So I think it's really cool that you've done this.
I think it's kind of slight overconfidence, really. I mean, I thought I didn't know anything about the period, and I thought I could get the research done in about 6 months, write the book in the remainder of the year, and then I would go back to sci-fi eventually. And it took me about 5 years. So,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, I was saying the other day that if I'd known how long it would take me, I might have been a bit more trepidatious. But I just plunged right in, and by the time I started thinking, have I made the biggest mistake of my life? It was kind of too late. I was immersed.
Yeah, I think if you'd have known that it would have taken 5 years to research and write, you'd probably have talked yourself out of it. So it's probably for the best you didn't know that.
Or my partner would have.
Yeah.
My friends and family had an intervention.
Oh God. But let's talk about your research process, because I'm always interested in hearing about that. So what kind of particularly fascinated you about this period, and what was the research process like?
Yeah, I mean, what I really loved about this period, and again, I didn't know anything about it before I started, was first of all that it was a really strange transitional period in English history. So it's the end of the medieval era, just kind of beginning to turn into the Renaissance. So it's just before Henry VIII comes in, but yeah, it's just after the Wars of the Roses, and it's a sort of interlude almost. And then you've got the language changing from Middle English to early modern. So it's, yeah, so many things in society were shifting. But it's actually a really unexpected time. I mean, I kind of, once I'd realized that it wasn't really strictly the Tudor period yet, that was still in development. I kind of thought, okay, it's medieval. And then I had this whole set of preconceptions about the medieval era, that it was grim and oppressed and, people getting burned at the stake every day and, everyone smelled and, women were owned by their husbands, all these things. And actually I realized that a lot of this wasn't the case. It's the witch trials hadn't really kicked in yet. Serfdom was over. At this point, that was just a memory. So as a common like a low person, as they're called by the nobles in the book, Simnel and his family would have actually had quite a lot of freedom. Women had more freedom than I imagined. You could choose who you married as a common person. You could divorce if you wanted to, or separate. You could run your own business. If you're a widow, you actually had quite a lot of autonomy. So that was all really nice to discover, because it gives you more ability to write people and their choices. And because it's tough sometimes reading a novel where everyone is completely constrained by circumstance. So that was one of the really great discoveries in my research. And the other one was just that it was a lot more fun than I realized. I thought it would be a very religious period. And again, with the oppression assumption that I'd made. And actually, everyone at all levels of society loved a rude joke. They liked to mock those above them. Satire was a huge tradition. And there is just, from carvings in churches to drawings in the margins of medieval manuscripts to literature like the Canterbury Tales, at all levels, there was toilet humor and people were making fun of other people. And I liked that. I thought, this is an energy that I want to bring to the book. I want it to be irreverent and even silly. And so that made it so much more unexpectedly fun to write than I imagined.
Yeah, I definitely didn't expect to laugh as much whilst reading this book. I don't know why, but it made me laugh a lot, and it was very silly in parts, very playful, and I really loved the kind of tone of it. There was a particular thing that I came across that completely threw me when I first read it, and I had to pause and be like, no, I definitely just read that. And then I googled what it was, and it was a real thing, and it was Grope Cunt Lane. Which is a real thing. Can you tell the listeners about that?
Yeah, sure. So in that period, I mean, cunt was not really, it didn't have the connotations it has now. It wasn't a rude word. It was kind of just a normal word for what it was. So medieval Oxford at the time, where you find the lane, you have the streets are pretty literal. Like, you've got Fish Street where fish was sold, Bread Street where bread was sold, and then there's Grope Cunt Lane, and it's kind of obvious what happens there. Yeah. And this is this street that really fascinates my young protagonist, because he's kind of just coming of age himself as the novel starts, and he's desperate to see the inhabitants of Grope Cunt Lane, but never quite manages to lay eyes on them.
But I think that's another interesting element in the story, is that there's actually quite a lot of sex, and obviously this is in many ways a kind of coming of age story, and he's a young boy, so of course he's going to start kind of observe, he hears things at first from the maids. He kind of listens into the stuff that they're talking about, and then he's particularly interested in this book later on in the story. I think it's called, I don't know if I'm going to pronounce this wrong, but Le Mort d'Arthur. That was terrible, but there's
no, perfect.
Okay, great. But there's a book that he's particularly intrigued by, and it's described by another character as heathenish. And I was curious, was this interest in sex kind of specific to the time, or was it just this kind of emphasis on the fact that he was coming of age and he was maybe kind of, I don't know, coming of age way before his time?
Yes. So, I mean, both are true. So, I mean, he's a teenage boy, and even though he's technically in training to be king and is supposed to be learning etiquette and sword and how to sort of present himself as a prince, he is also looking at girls and just has that normal and natural interest. So I wanted to kind of show him as very much a timeless man in that development. But then also interest in sex is timeless. It was, there are a lot of rude books around. People were having plenty of sex. The church actually didn't have quite a strong grip on people's marital and sex lives back then as it later did. You could say that you were married, and you were married. People consider you as a couple, and there was cheating. It's kind of the subject of a lot of the farces of the time and things. It's there's a thing. Human nature hasn't really changed that much. So I wanted to include that because it would have been going on. It's always going on. It just sometimes is driven into more subversive undergrounds. But actually, in the medieval era, it wasn't that underground. It was all over the place, and they weren't squeamish about it.
Yeah.
It was.
It is Ryan Seacrest here. There was a recent social media trend which consisted of flying on a plane with no music, no movies, no entertainment. But a better trend would be going to ChumbaCasino.com. It's like having a mini social casino in your pocket. Chumba Casino has over 100 online casino-style games, all absolutely free. It's the most fun you can have online and on a plane. So grab your free welcome bonus now at ChumbaCasino.com. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. 21 plus. Terms and conditions apply.
As it has been in later eras. So yeah, he's basically, and he's not just a sex mad teenager. He has romance as well. But yeah, his early interest in Le Morte d'Arthur is because he's heard that it's got some stories about knights and ladies having illicit relations, and he's just really keen to get to know more about that because no one's really told him.
No, but you'd be intrigued by that, wouldn't you? I think it's completely normal. I want to talk about the romance that you just mentioned with Joan, and I don't know how much we can mention about this because I do like to keep things spoiler free, but what kind of inspired that relationship in the book?
So yeah, this is kind of he has various stages of his life, and Ireland is, I think, so he goes from his farming childhood to Oxford, then he goes to sort of this very lavish, privileged court in Mechelen in the Low Countries, and then he goes from there to Ireland. So he's in another high court, but it's very different in tone. So whereas the court of his aunt in Mechelen, who was the Duchess of Burgundy, that was very formalized and polite, and they were seen as very refined. Ireland is a lot more rough and ready, as it would have been at that time. It's not that they were uncivilized; I think it was more fun. Like I kind of took the tone of Ireland, sort of like a big Irish wedding with like beheadings. Obviously, my partner's Irish, so I had the right to do this. It's not appropriate. So anyway, in Ireland, this is where he meets the great Earl of Ireland, Gerald Fitzgerald, or the great Earl of Kildare. That was his official title, and he was he's well documented. He's quite a formidable man, charismatic, strong-willed, very dynamic, and he was called the uncrowned King of Ireland at various times, and he did rule Ireland. He was the only man who could really unite the kind of English ruling classes who had control of a portion of it, the Pale, and the Gaelic lords who controlled various parts of the rest, Gaelic kings. And I found that he had these daughters, lots of daughters, and several of them made it into the history books in their own right, which is, not as common. Mm-hmm. They played a part in politics and battles, and, it seemed like they were just as forceful as their father, which I really loved. So from that, I thought, if my character, Edward, as he's called at this point in the books, he changes identity as it goes on, if Edward's going to fall for anyone, it's going to be one of these girls. And we don't really know anything about their individual characters. We know they obviously, had agency, but we don't know who they were personally. So I kind of did Joan, his love interest, a little bit of a disservice in that she's kind of got some sociopathic tendencies. She's not the nicest, sweetest girl, but she takes it on herself to teach Edward how to survive in the only way that she knows how, which is scheming and sometimes murder. And he takes it on himself to turn her to God and bring her to the path of goodness. And one of them wins out. But yeah, maybe I shouldn't say as a spoiler who that is.
Yeah, of course, yeah. But I absolutely loved their relationship, and I just thought it was a really nice touch in the book. It's just nice to have a little bit of romance in there, isn't it? And he was very besotted with her. Yes, I would say that's the right word, isn't it? Besotted.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I don't know why I have these moments where I question the words that I use.
Oh, I do. I mean, words are supposed to be my job, and there are words I've used wrong for years. I think last year I only discovered that I've been using the word purveyor wrong. I thought it meant a collector, and apparently it means a retailer. So yeah, God knows how many people I've confused with that one.
Yeah, I'm glad it's not just me.
There's more to come. Yeah, no. The thing is, I'll read a word and I'll take the meaning from the context. I don't actually go and look it up, and so I think I've made a lot of assumptions over time, and more will probably come to light. But yeah, he is enchanted by Joan and also kind of horrified by her. He doesn't want to fancy her initially. I think she's terrible, but he does. He can't help himself.
No, and that's fair enough. I get it. I want to ask about what it was like actually inheriting the mind of a young boy. What was that like?
I mean, tricky and kind of presumptuous presumptuous. Like, who am I to say what a 12-year-old child 500 years ago thought or felt? But I try to kind of find some universals. I think partly because the medieval mindset is partly lost to us. In some ways, they were exactly they had the same preoccupations. We talked about sex and humor and things and romance. Like, they were, to a point, the same people as us, but then in other ways, they felt very differently about a lot of things. So I kind of felt like, well, I can't exactly get it right or wrong because we just don't know. Like, nobody can access what it would be to be Lambert Simnel.
Mm-hmm.
But well, I'm as much as anyone, maybe I'll do it. I'll have a go. So, and no one can be like, well, that actually wasn't true because we don't know.
Yeah.
So yes, I think I don't know if I pulled it off. I hope at least I portrayed a convincing human. Who knows if I really portrayed him, if he were alive today and read it, what on earth he would make of it.
I mean, I am obviously not a young boy, so I don't know how true it might be, but it felt very authentic, and I really enjoyed reading it. So I think that's the main takeaway you want, is that people enjoy it, and I thought it was great. I do want to talk about class because I think this is such an interesting aspect of history, and it's obviously something that's still very much present in the UK, the class system. And it's something that seems to have always existed, but it's obviously kind of shape-shifted the way it exists. But obviously we see class divides in the book through in terms of illness and kind of who gets ill, status, where they live, how they live, and kind of there's also this like obsession with, maybe not obsession, but there's obviously the royal structures and royal hierarchies, and obviously the fact that somebody would want to push somebody to be a pretender anyway seems to be a kind of fascination with the royal family and the royal hierarchy. So why would someone be so eager to be a royal in this kind of period of time? And could you kind of tell us about the class divides that you came across?
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, back then they didn't really it wasn't a caste system, but it was so much closer to that than we have today. I know in England, we do still have obvious class divisions and inequality, but back then it was so much more defined. So a lot of the literature and teachings of the time, like church teachings, were that you had this orderly society with the king at the top, then the nobles, the ecclesiastics, all the way down to peasants at the bottom, and everyone, and for the ideal society, as described, everyone stayed in their lane. There wasn't, you shouldn't. You could be successful within it, but you knew your place and you stayed there, and that was what was really heavily promoted to everyone. Not that there wasn't social mobility. You got people. I mean, Simnel's dad in the beginning, he gets money because of his part in this plot. So he gets paid. And so he's a wealthy, becomes a rich farmer in his area and is kind of the talk of the village. So yeah, that was just this present reality. And this is kind of what gives Lambert his real preoccupation with who he is, because that would have been so much more clear to him. Like, he just, without knowing what his place is in this very important system, he's kind of lost. Like, he doesn't know who he can marry. He doesn't know if it's a sin for him to ascend to the throne, because that would be the ultimate faux pas, a peasant on the throne. So once this note of doubt is introduced into his identity by Joan, actually, this is the first time he really questions whether the story he's been told about him being the real Earl of Warwick swapped at birth is actually true. He's then plunged into this terror that he's doing a bad thing. He isn't royal, and this isn't his destiny. And I think for the modern mindset, that's actually one of the most alien concepts possibly in the book. Though I think we are interested in our bloodlines now. Like, we're interested in DNA tests, and if we're adopted, we want to find out where we came from. Mm-hmm. But I think, that the magnitude of that was really turned up in the medieval era. It was a key part of life. And like, we can choose to investigate these things or not, and that's kind of our privilege. So yeah, that's the background to this rise. So you can see on one hand, he's very seduced by the lifestyle that's on offer. And once he gets over his initial terror of being dressed by other people or not knowing what on earth the things put in front of him at a banquet are, he does start to enjoy, things like candied figs and oranges and mead. As a peasant, he only drank ale. So he's getting used to the finer things in life, but he's also terrified that he's not entitled to them. And also there's the prospect of what he has to go through to get there. Like people keep saying he'll be king, he'll be king, he'll be king, but the subtext is or die trying. So he's, in a way, he's got that fairy tale plucked out of his existence and propelled into the upper levels of society, the higher stratosphere. But actually he was quite happy at the farm. He had a nice life there. And he's absolutely terrified of what awaits him as king. So yeah, or in the attempt. So I wanted to kind of explore all the complexity of that.
Yeah, and you did it so well. And I do want to ask you about the kind of differences between modern life and historical life. And there's one thing that, and I need to be so careful here because it's potential for spoilers, and I'm not going to name characters for this specific reason. But he's John and he's Lambert and he's Edward, is he? Is that the name he gives? Yeah. So I don't know which name he is at the point of this, but he's presented with the idea of men wanting to be with men and women wanting to be with women, and this idea of, obviously LGBTQ people have always existed, it's just whether they were allowed to kind of live openly. And when he's kind of presented with this, he's kind of confused and he's like, oh, is that allowed to happen? Like, and I wanted to know what it was like kind of exploring those stories and why you wanted to feature them in the book. Obviously, it's really difficult to talk about without giving spoilers, so...
Yeah, I'm just going to accidentally name the character probably because I always put my foot in it. So yeah, he's at this point in the novel, so this is in the later stages.
Yes.
I don't think it's a spoiler to say that he's court of King Henry VII and he's working effectively as a spy for Henry. This is part of his second act. And it was a tricky one because I wanted to have representation at that time. But the problem was not just in terms of LGBTQ, but in terms of people of color and Jewish people. I wanted to sort of show diversity in England at that time, and there kind of wasn't much. So in the Roman era, we had, they had a much more diverse society. So I think from burials, we've got evidence of people of, all different backgrounds. But in this specific era, I think the first Black person to arrive at court was in the retinue of Catherine of Aragon, because in Spain, they had a lot of people coming from Africa and the Arabic. So that was a familiar thing for them. So I trawled the records to see if, what people of color was sort of living in England at this time. There isn't. There isn't. In this specific era, couldn't find anybody. So that was unfortunate. And then again, at this point in history, all the Jewish people have been ordered out of England after being massacred in a lot of places. They weren't living in England for a few hundred years, I think. So I think there was some converted, they call them conversos in Spain. I don't know what they called them in England, but Jews had basically had to convert to Christianity to be allowed to stay in England. So again, diversity was, even though they weren't as racist as I thought, they also were not at all diverse. But we do have loads of examples of gay people, bi people, a lot of whom had to sort of fly under the radar. But, there are various high profile situations, kings that had these male favorites and of course, this just would have been going on. It just didn't really get publicized. You have a lot of, in monasteries, you kind of see what would have been going on from official records in a sort of roundabout way. So you would get an abbot issuing dictates, saying the novices are not allowed to share beds and things like that. And that was the same in the nunneries as well. So you can get a picture of what people was managing to get up to at that point. So I thought it would be unrealistic not to have somebody, a gay person in the book, because that absolutely would have been present. Yeah. So yes, I wanted to include that. I'm not actually gay or bi myself, so I didn't want to make them a main character because I feel like that's not my story to tell, but I did want to have that voice represented in the novel.
Yeah, and I think that's great that there's that representation there, and it's so interesting to hear about your research and kind of realizing that it's not actually as diverse a society as you thought. It's always really cool to hear about stuff like that. Obviously, like you said, it's unfortunate, but it's just really interesting to kind of learn about that. I also wanted to ask you, before we round off with your recommendation, I wanted to ask in terms of your research. Obviously, like I said earlier, that the novel moves from lots of different places. Did you get to spend any time in those places whilst you were writing the book?
Sadly, not as many as I wanted to or thought. No, it's unfortunately we haven't really respected a lot of our medieval architecture. So I think in Mechelen, you can see the exterior of Margaret's palace where he stays, but the interior's been changed. It's still in use, but it doesn't look anything like how it would have looked in his era. So I felt like I would love to go there, but I'm not sure I'm going to get anything more than what I've got from the photos online. Though Belgium actually does have some incredibly well-preserved medieval villages and things. They're just not the particular ones he visits in the novel. He's in the city, which has obviously changed a lot because cities do. And yeah, Oxford actually was really great because that has so much of the university buildings are of that era or previous. You've still got remnants of like the castle walls and things from Saxon times. So you can do a really good medieval tour of Oxford and actually get a sense in some places. Some of the street names are the same, not Grope Cunt Lane, that's changed.
Disappointing.
Yeah, it's sad to say. I'm not sure what it's called now, actually. It's something really innocuous. But yeah, so Oxford I would recommend. Dublin, sadly, I really wanted to go to Dublin and kind of pair it with maybe a bit of a fun holiday as well. But everything that he sees in Dublin is now gone. Like the cathedral that he was baptized in, that's no longer existent. The palace of the Earl of Kildare, where he stays in Dublin, that's not there anymore. So I will go to Dublin again, but not for research purposes.
Fair. I'm sad that you didn't get to travel to all these places that you referenced, but I mean, I love Oxford. I think it's a beautiful city, so kind of any excuse to visit there. It was really great to read about those places in your book, and as I said earlier, The Pretender is out now, published by Bloomsbury. I will be popping a link in the show notes. Before I let you go, Joe, I do like to finish on a recommendation. So is there anything that you would like to recommend?
Yes. Well, we were talking about TV earlier, and even though no one really needs to know about this because I think it's huge, I'm going to say The White Lotus just because it's what we're watching at the moment. So we're not anywhere near the end. So yes, I'm trying to avoid spoilers desperately. I've had to go off social media for a while because I keep seeing these like reaction memes and I have to just quickly shut it down.
Avoid them.
Yeah. So we need to have a binge, but we're renovating a house at the moment, so we keep falling asleep.
Understandable.
Yeah, I don't actually, my partner does. So it's frustrating I just want to know what happens at this point, and I know I have access to it. Yes, it's getting doled out to me in tiny little portions.
I can't wait to hear what you think of the finale. I really enjoyed it. But I'll say nothing more. I'm not going to give you any spoilers, don't worry. Aside from renovating your house, are you working on anything else at the moment?
So I'm actually I'm working on another medieval historical because the book's from America and it's part of a 2-book contract with my publisher, and they wanted another historical, which I was happy to do. So actually in this one, I think I am going to get some good research trips, and I'm also going to be able to include some of the things I wasn't able to include in this one because part of it will be set in medieval Spain. So it will be the era of the Spanish Inquisition. It's the era of a queen called Juana la Loca, Joanna the Mad. And she was a fascinating character. And also in Spain, there's so much of the architecture still there and viewable. So I am 100% going to go on some research trips to Spain and enjoy that.
Oh, I'm so jealous. That sounds amazing. I can't wait to read that. And hopefully we can get you back on the podcast. But yeah, it would be. Thank you so much, Joe, for joining me on A Pair of Bookends today. It's been an absolute pleasure chatting to you. And thank you for making time for me during the chaos of renovation.
It's been a lovely break. Thank you so much for having me. It's
Thank you.
A really nice morning, not stripping wallpaper.
Love that. Is there anywhere that the listeners can find you online?
Actually not. I'm not on social media. So don't go looking.
Good. They can find you. It's not just because of the White Lotus.
No, I wasn't on that before.
Well, they can find you through your books, which is the most important thing. So for our listeners, if you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to rate, review and subscribe. And if you want to give us a follow, you can do so at A Pair of Bookends Pod on Instagram and at A Pair of Bookends on Twitter and TikTok. Go find yourself a copy of The Pretender, which I will be popping a link to in the show notes. I will also pop a link to Joe's previous book in the show notes as well, so you can grab yourself a copy of that. But lastly, thank you so much for listening, and thank you again, Joe, and goodbye.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on ChumbaCasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at ChumbaCasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's ChumbaCasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW Group. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.